Good afternoon, everybody. I have the absolute pleasure of having the absolute top of the food chain analyst for silver. Before I even knew about silver, got into silver, I knew the name David Morgan. And today I am blessed to be here doing an interview with David. So, David, wow, it blows my mind to actually do interviews with you because in my mind, when I was younger, you were the legend of silver, and you still are. You are the man of silver, and I just find it such a blessing to have you on my show. This is my second interview with you. I did one with you like years ago. And so, we're back on, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you about the precious metals and silver because in my personal opinion and my analysis, I think we are at an epic and a really critical point in our world. And I'd love to hear your take on what your feelings are about silver and precious metals. And so everybody, David Morgan.
Well, Bo, thank you for inviting me. And I hope I can live halfway up to that introduction, but it'll be fun. Thanks.
We met years ago at the Silver Summit Conference. I think I don't even know, 4 or 5 years ago. And, we were just, we all been saying, yes, silver is, is what you want to have. It's going to go up and it's got a industrial use and it's a precious metal and you got to own silver because it's the best thing. And all we've seen for 5 years and you've seen forever is manipulation, and more manipulation. So, it's truly amazing what they can do with numbers and what they can do with contracts. And, like we've talked earlier in the preview, my whole belief is if silver had any value, their money wouldn't. So what's your take on it, David?
That is a perfect way to say it. I love things that are short, succinct, and that makes them elegant. Yeah. If their money didn't have any value, ours would. Yeah, I think that's the key. I mean, when I remember, reading about GATA early on, and to this day, I don't agree with every single thing about GATA, but certainly most of it is there. It's verifiable. Why argue with the fact? I mean, they quote, people and different things that have been written with the Exchange Stabilization Fund. I don't want to go too divergent here, but when they made the point, which is difficult to prove, of what you said, that the reason gold's low is because they want the dollar high. And I generally knew that, but, they build that case over and over and over again. And of course, being involved in both precious metals, the resource sector at large, and the whole system is set up, as I've said forever, on a lie. You cannot create something from nothing, yet the whole system is based on creating quote unquote currency out of thin air. And, the thing about the silver market and the wheat market and the soybean oil and cotton and cocoa and all the commodities is they're all derivatives. Every one of those price settlement mechanisms is a contract. That's what the price settlement is. It's a contract that's that price. In the rare occasion, which is about 1% of the time throughout the sector, meaning the whole commodities, do you actually deliver on that contract? 99% of the time, you deliver phony fiat fictions on that contract. So wouldn't you like to be in business, Bo, where let's say you're a house painter and you have 100 houses to paint and you get paid for all 100, but you only have to paint one of them. Pretty good deal if you can get it, huh?
Well, exactly. Another comparison to that would be for every ounce of silver or every ounce of gold, they've probably sold that that piece of silver or gold 500 times, right? So that's the same analogy to selling 500 homes, but only paying for one.
Yeah. But it's a system. I mean, it is what it is. And I've thought it through. In fact, I did an interview yesterday and, there really does, for my thinking so far, subject change, there is pretty much a need to be able to hedge. So it's like, well, am I against the futures market? Not really. I understand the principles. And I think when it began, it was done in a manner that was useful to both sides, speculators and the producer, the wheat grower, the soybean grower, the cotton grower, the oil man. But it's gotten so distorted because the leverage has been so extreme, as you indicated. And there's a way to fix that. In fact, it's actually on the books, but no one pays attention to it. And that's how much fictional oil, cotton, wheat, cocoa, silver you can have. And that's the rub. If you're allowed to only sell short the amount that you could produce within a year, let's be generous. Let's say 2 years, or super generous, 3 years of wheat or corn or whatever. That's fairly reasonable. I mean, if you could hedge out 2 years because you're going from wheat to soybeans, whatever. I'm trying to make some common sense here. But no, you can just print up as much wheat paper as you want, or as much soybean paper as you want. And what's interesting about silver is it's far exceeds any of the other commodities by far. I mean, you've got days to cover, and I haven't looked at this chart in a while. Ed Steer puts it out, but how much cover there is on like oil and wheat and soybeans, and all of them are fairly modest, pretty much within the realm of reasonableness. But when you get to silver, it stands out. It's just this huge, line of how many days of production or months, I should say, is sold. That's fiction.
Well, isn't a market, by definition, a market that discovers its own price? So you have true price discovery, so it's a market is created between buyers and sellers. Like if I wanted to buy a car and there's 10 people in line for that car, that would create the price of the car because they'd be bidding up for the for the purchase of the car. So that's what true price discovery is. But with derivative contracts, you don't have that. You have an entity, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have an entity, right, that just sets the price at the end of every single day. Is that not what's going on? So where's the true price discovery would be the best question.
Yeah, you're right. Now, this is fairly detailed. I mean, you can get away with that 1% as long as that 1% is always obtainable. And, to be honest, it's been obtainable in the silver market for a long time. There's only been a couple of instances where we've had what I consider to be a silver shortage, and they were very short in time duration. But another way to look at it, and you're right, is what's the buyer willing to pay? And it's the high bid that gets it. So if I'm going to bid $20,000 for that used, Dodge truck, and you're bidding $22,000, I don't want to go that high, you walk off with it because you're the high bid. Same thing in the markets, supposedly. So people are willing to pay 6, 7, 8, fiat, fictions over the spot price for coins, certain coins like government minted coins, like the Silver Eagle. So there's a market. So you've really got a bifurcation in the market. And we've seen this for a long time with silver, where there's the silver derivatives price, which represents 1,000-ounce commercial bars. And then there's the retail silver, which is government coins, medallions, 10-ounce bars, kilo bars, 100-ounce bars. And those have a huge premium, but people are paying that amount. And, if everyone bought everything through retail and there was no commercial market, in other words, no 1,000-ounce bars ever was sold as 1,000-ounce bars, they were always converted to a retail product. So they always became 100-ounce bars or kilo bars or silver rounds or whatever. If that were the case, it's not. But if that were the case, then the retail market would eventually set the price of silver, because all that 1% that keeps getting drained off of the COMEX has been more than that. That's just a general number that's, a long time number. It varies. Then you would see over time that everyone that's holding retail silver is actually controlling the market. Unfortunately, well, I would say unfortunately, I'll just state it as a fact, that's not the case. But the retail market is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, as you know, Bo. It varies again, but when the Silver Eagle program started, they could barely sell 10 million ounces of silver in a year. And now you get into the 40 or larger 40 million ounces of silver sold on just the Silver Eagle program, not counting the Maples or the Kangaroos or the Austrian Philharmonics or some of the other government coins.
What are your thoughts, David, on, since people are starting to buy more silver and, it's kind of getting out there, people are kind of loading up. but there's still inventory. Like, even in the past year or two, where do you think they are getting their inventory? Any thoughts on that? Because it's going to start getting to be a point where it's squeezing, I would think, because I know the word's out. People are starting to buy now. And even since last year, they're still able to fill orders. So it's interesting. Any thoughts on where they're
Sure.
where they're getting some of this? Because there's a lot of silver. Once people buy it, they're not selling it back. They're people are starting to hoard it.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One is, what the silver production was when when silver was the lowest inflation adjusted price. So when Buffett bought in the very late 90s, inflation adjusted was the cheapest it ever been. Yeah, it was in the $4 range or so, below $5. And that's a bigger number than 22 cents during the Great Depression, but inflation adjusted is actually lower than 22 cents. So there's that. And then we were in a deficit from 1990, before Buffett bought, through 2006. So for 15 consecutive years, we took the above ground stockpile down from 2 billion ounces of silver to 500,000. So we were down to a very small number by 2006. Silver production started ramping up in a serious way in the early 2000s. And that's been the main, one of the main reasons. Well, where's the silver coming from? Well, if you're mining 550 million ounces of silver in 2000, and now you're mining 850 million ounces in the last several years, that's a 300 million ounce increase in production on an annual basis. So that's part of the answer. I just have to digress a bit. Back in the 70s bull market of silver, the most we ever mined in a year, for decades, was 350 million ounces. In fact, Jerome Smith made a big error in his prediction that silver would reach $200 an ounce by the mid 90s. Now, remember, he'd written this book in the 80s. So he's going out about 10 or 15 years. And he said, we'll see $200 silver. Well, he probably was correct if he was correct in his assumption or his presupposition that the mining activity had topped out at 350 million ounces. But once the ink was drying in that book, the methodology or technology changed for mining. And once that technology changed, we started ramping up from 350 to 550 and then 550 to 850. So part of it's that. The other part that's more important, well, as important to me, in my thinking, where does it come from? And that is, what's going to shake loose silver from investors' hands? Well, you have silver and you lost your job and you never planned to sell it. Now you got to sell it. I mean, that kind of stuff happens across the board, right? There's not a lot of that, but there's some of that. But what's the big one? Well, the big one in 2020 was India. The Indians primarily saved in silver before they became wealthier, which has been the last decade or so, right along with China, where they've bought a lot more gold. But up until that period, almost anyone, peasants included, any spare money wasn't in the bank. It was in silver jewelry. And that's how they hold their wealth. 2020 was an all-time paper price for the rupee for silver. Hard times, COVID, not working, crop failures, and everything else. So they were motivated by either the high price and or economic conditions that they were experiencing. So there was a lot of divestment of silver in India that no one ever talked about, but it was huge.
One thing, I appreciate that. And one thing I wanted to kind of like a several layer question. Years ago into 1980, we had that massive spike on silver into $49, $50. That was the Hunt brothers. And at the same time, that is when gold, right in that time frame, spiked up to like $600 or $700.
850, but yeah.
Okay, 850. Okay. And so my question is multifold kind of. So the price of 850, if I'm not mistaken, the reason for that 850 price is because gold spiked up to meet the money supply, if I'm not wrong, but if we can expand on that. And so when that event happened, and then talk about current money supply, because basically we have a couple issues that have now come up, especially this year. Well, first off, we've had the Saudi Arabia-Russia contract, which basically, in my opinion, nullifies the U.S. Saudi Arabia contract because you don't need two contracts. Then we have the layering in of the Evergrande debacle, which is now started off in September. So let's talk about money supply, because the reason gold spiked to $850 in 1980 was because of money supply, the amount of money that was created. So can you talk about money that, we don't even know how much money is created, but all I know is, and last question to layer into that question was, from what I recall or know or researched, is it took 100 years to create the first trillion. Now they're creating that, overnight, from what I'm hearing. So go ahead and all those layers of questions, if you can kind of put that all together for us, David.
Yeah, I think I can do that. So if you go back to the, days when I, began this quest of, honest money and why gold and silver are important and what the bankers really do, how money's created and all that. The early days, the honest money advocates, we'll call it, were always tuned in. And so was the market. The market was very tuned into the M1 money supply, which is basically your actual money, your wallet money, the pieces of paper, and checking account money, to keep it real basic. And you could go even further and call it just what's printed, and that's base money supply. So to have the theoretical prices, how much is gold worth? If you want to find the theoretical price of gold, you find out what the base money supply is, because gold's a currency. It doesn't expand. It can't, make more of itself. You have to mine more of it. So it's a static amount that's increased by more labor and effort mining. So the base money supply to have gold coverage is how many pieces of paper are there and how much gold. So dollars per ounce. So you take the amount of M1 or M0 base money divided by the amount of gold. If you do that in 1980, the base money supply, dollars, divided by gold equaled $400 the ounce. And it got to $850. And there's an article, I think you can still look it up. It's called Engineering the Price of Gold by David Morgan. I think it's still out there on the web. It's one of the first articles I ever wrote. And I did that in early 2000. I forget if it was 2001, 2, or 3, somewhere in that range. If you did that math back then, gold was $2,500 an ounce. But since silver's been demonetized, then there's a little bit of thought about, well, what's the silver price? Because, well, what is it? Is it money? Well, if it's money, then it's easy to figure it's 1/16 the price of gold. So you can do that math and figure out the price of silver. So what I said in that article was you could have gone back to basically a gold coin standard, not a 40% cover ratio. You could have covered every piece of paper that said 1 on it, or 10 or 20, with gold times 2. And of course, there was a short period of time where it hit that level, but gold stayed, and I forget the exact average price for 1980. I know in 1980, the average price for silver was $20. I think gold was somewhere around $650. So you had a whole year there where the Treasury could have said, you know what, that temporary closure of the window on August 15th, 1971 was temporary. We're going back on gold. And it could have been done. But of course, no politician wants to do that because they know they're just going to keep printing into oblivion. So if you do that same arithmetic now with base money supply and the 265 million ounces that the Treasury purportedly has, you come out like in the $15,000 per ounce range. So if you do the 15-to-1 ratio, you would say $1,000 silver. Now, I'm not predicting any of those prices, but it's funny that gold gets more, in my view, big numbers than silver. And I'll make the exception here, but you often hear about $10,000 gold or $15,000 gold or even $50,000 gold. And you do hear $600 silver, primarily due to, the web bot research that Cliff High's done for so many years. And I'm well aware of that number. But, you start talking $100 silver and you're a kook. And of course, I wrote that silver got to 100 back in 2003. And yet, if you go to someone like, I won't say his name, but he's well respected. I really think he's very smart. I follow his work pretty closely. And he was on a show and he wasn't really thinking, in my view. He said, yeah, well, when gold gets to 15,000 and silver is 100. Well, that math is pretty easy to do in your head. That means that the gold silver ratio now is 150 to 1. So what he was trying to say is that, yeah, gold's going to explode. Silver's really going to go high too, 100. Well, it is very low on the gold silver ratio. So people, a lot of the main commentators are more gold centric than silver, and not that silver is better than gold or vice versa, although I could argue why silver is far more useful than gold. And I think anyone that's followed my work or others that, look at the silver market with a really hard case can make that argument. So I think I beat that dog to death. You can let me know if I answered everything. I know you threw about 3 things in there, but the money supply, what the cover ratio is, what it would be back in 1980, what is it now, and where, and does that, and I guess the last part of it would be, are we going there? And the answer is yes. Are we going to get there exactly? We don't know. What we do know is that they're very undervalued in terms of the amount of paper that's been printed, and every day somebody, it's not one new person on the planet, it's 100, it's 1,000, it's 10,000, I don't know the number, but there's more people waking up and say, you know what, this only makes common sense, I've got to get some. And then there's a bigger offtake in the precious metals in a physical way.
Well, so then what are your thoughts with regard to what went down, the events of Saudi Arabia and Russia, military pact, versus what happened with the United States 50 years ago in Saudi Arabia? What do you think the implications are of Saudi Arabia? I mean, what are you feeling that why this would have happened? But why would Saudi Arabia have signed a military pact with a superpower?
Well, because they see the world changing, and I think there's been less and less trust in the United States for decades. And I wouldn't say it's just this particular administration, although that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. So you go back into the early 80s, the Saudis really didn't trust the dollar at all.
Right.
They wanted oil, they wanted gold for oil.
Yeah.
And then Kissinger stepped in and said, look, well, my word's not his. We'll pay us protection money, and you have our military at your disposal.
Right. So interrupt for a second. So the reason the US dollar has been the world reserve currency, correct me if I'm wrong, but the US dollar has been the world reserve currency because it's been called the petrodollar for the past 50 years because of that Saudi Arabia contract. So Saudi Arabia agreed to buy US bonds for military protection. Yeah. That's the essence of the petrodollar.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what was so beautiful for the United States point of view is that they had all this excess, dollars because they were the oil kings and have been for quite some time. So they all these dollars, they didn't really know what to do with. I mean, you can only buy so many Rolls Royces. You can only have so many vacation homes. You can only build so many bridges to nowhere. So what did they do with the excess dollars? Well, they put them into the long bond. Yeah. Which was just the most beautiful thing for the United States that could ever happen.
Yeah.
So it's like buy our debt with all these extra dollars that you're getting. And as you said, that occurred for 50 years. So what happened? Well, just a lot of things. This is conjecture on my part. It's my opinion, studied one, is that they, lost trust with the West more and more over time. And Russia's basically given them a better deal. They're more trustworthy.
Well, and think of it this way.
Breaking the contract with the U.S. and saying, you know what, you're not our protector anymore. We've had our bodyguard called USA or USD, and we're getting a new one. Goodbye.
And that's exactly the point. The point is, you don't need to go get another superpower to protect you if you already have a superpower protecting you. That's the essence of the understanding. Like if you have the United States, which is the most powerful nation on the world protecting you, why would you go sign a contract, a military contract with another superpower, the second superpower of the world, Russia, unless you felt that you don't want to honor that contract anymore? Now, that's a huge problem, David, in my opinion, and I'd like to hear your take on it. But if that contract is no valid anymore, then the dollar isn't valid anymore as the world reserve currency. So my understanding is that in my analysis of, why something could go hugely wrong for the dollar is because of that agreement that was signed. And then that would then create this biblical moment, this timeline that I'm looking at, and I'm sure you're seeing as well potentially now too, because it's fascinating that that dollar Nixon event is 50 years as of this past summer, August. Okay. And if you understand the Bible, those who read the Bible, and you don't need to read all of it, but there's a section called Jubilee. The Jubilee is a 50-year. It's the 50 year. It's a year of rest. It's the year of the Lord's favor. It's a day of his vengeance, but it's a really critical time in the Bible. So if the dollar breaks and Saudi Arabia still has a contract that's protecting it with Russia, they don't honor the contract with the United States. That ultimately breaks the only reason the US dollar really had value, because it wasn't backed by gold after Nixon anymore, right? So that moment in time, all we have, we potentially could have a biblical intervention, and that's honestly what I think is going to happen here. And so, what's your take on that whole idea? So I'd love to hear your perspective, David.
Well, we heard yours, and I tend to agree with almost all of it. I'm in agreement. So just to kind of add on to what you said is, a trend continues till it actually stops.
Yeah, until it's
so the trend was the petrodollar, and now that's basically stopping. These things do not happen overnight. There has been a shift. Most people are not awake to it because it was kind of a subtle, press release kind of a thing.
It's called a nothing burger, Oh, that's nothing.
Right.
There's just a world reserve currency that's just a world reserve currency. Yeah. It's nothing.
And again, it's like not instantaneous. So people just, the dollar's strong right now. It will remain strong relative to the other currencies for a while, but it is going to go in the dustbin of history like all fiat currencies. And they meaning the banking elite, the money powers, I'll call it, because there's power behind, there's powers that we don't see, in my view, demonic, that are above even the Rothschilds. I mean, not that they aren't multi trillionaires, but there's something beyond that in my study. Coming back on point, Bo, we're in a point where it's going to shift into a new system. And what is that going to be? I don't think anyone knows what it looks like. I'm sure that the money powers have I wouldn't say vague idea, a pretty well outlined idea of central bank digital currencies and who's going to be in control. Maybe they use the SDR if they have to pull a rabbit out of the hat. If things start to unravel in a way that they're starting to lose control, they'll just, hit the circuit breakers, as they say, on the stock exchanges, all the brokerage houses, on all the banks, because they run them, and they'll say, stop, 2-day bank holiday. Here's what we're going to do. For the good of all, we will.
It's always for our safety and our best interest.
We're going to the SDR, special drawing rights. Who knows? There's lots of scenarios. I won't bore you. So getting back to the point, I think you outlined it perfectly well. What I want people to understand, and I think you articulated it, but I want to emphasize it. It isn't David and Bo said that the dollar's over. It doesn't.
It's a huge giant
out overnight. It's going to be subtle, and there'll be times we say, "Well, look at the dollar really shot up this week. Holy moly!" But the trend has changed. The trend has ended. And the other thing I have to back you up on is the Jubilee. I mean, it didn't dawn on me until I was actually doing an interview, and I go 50 years, and then my brain clicked in a little stronger and says, "Oh yeah, so that's the debt Jubilee, isn't it?"
Yeah, and then to put a little cherry on top of what we're talking about. See, if you think about the Red Sea, none of us were there, okay? But the point is, all is that Israel was pinned up against the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's army is coming to kill them all, okay? All of a sudden, the Red Sea, Moses says, "Stand still and watch the salvation of the Lord, for he will work for you, for us today." And all of a sudden, boom, the Red Sea opens. Like, I don't even know how you wrap your head around that concept, but it happened. They crossed the Red Sea, and then Pharaoh goes in there after them to kill them, and then God closes the sea after Israel crossed. And then the Red Sea closed after that point. The fascinating point is on that whole thing, David, is it was a moment in time. It was a day of his vengeance. So as you described the dollar, I would agree with you because they've been controlling us. But I think, and my heart, I feel there's going to be a moment in time where it won't be like just a gradual. No, there's going to be a moment in time where we're going to see the most insane thing happen with the dollar. And that moment in time is going to be the delineating time point where what separates everything they've done and then the new money system that basically is birthed at that moment. Mm-hmm. Because once this massive event happens, and maybe I'm wrong, but once this massive event happens, you can never go back. You know, right. Because there's only thing propping the dollar up right now is, well, number one is there's no more contracts, so that's a huge problem. So only thing left is faith and confidence. Well, there's no more. So it's the military contract's broken. Faith and confidence. Well, turn the TV on and look what's going on in your faith and confidence. How confident and how faithful do you feel right now? You know, I think we're going to see that moment in time. I think the best example I can give you, David, and I'd like to hear your comment on this as well too. It's like this long-term chart. I sent you a PDF earlier. Mm-hmm. If you could click that and go to page 35, it's my silver. It's a silver chart that I have there. What we've got is a huge, and again, people don't need to understand what charting is. Keep it simple. And what I've done, I've created an example there at the top, and then basically the bottom is silver for the past 40 years. And what you'll notice is what's called a cup and handle chart pattern. So my feeling, and I want to hear your take on this, David, but my feeling when I look at this is that handle, so right now the blue arrow points to where silver has been trading for the past couple months now, okay? It's at the underside of that handle, okay? When that handle breaks, silver will never look back. It's going to take off and never, ever, 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 ever come down, okay? So that'll be that moment in time that I'm describing as when God intervenes and starts to take down Goliath, the money system. So that's my take on it. I find the whole chart fascinating because it's a 40-year chart that did nothing but create a perfect chart.
Mm-hmm. No, I've seen that before. I think you did a really good job, and I agree. I mean, I'm pretty well a market student, learning more. I've never been a know-it-all, but there is nothing more powerful than a cup and handle formation. And once you get to the top of the handle, and what you really want is what the market is showing us. You want to really, it's like triathlons. You know, the longer the base, the better your race. And meaning that you take a lot of effort over time to build a foundation, and then when race day comes, you're ready to rip. It's similar to in this chart pattern that the longer you go making a cup, the higher this is going to scream. At least that's what history is showing. And then you want the handle to come off, not level. You want it to actually go down to the right. So right is more in time. So over time, you want it to degrade and come down in price. And this is just the way it works in a cup and handle formation. And as you show there with your blue arrow is right at the point. And so once you show a big like candle going up, and then it kind of looks like it gaps, and then it goes sideways right at that, what I'll call tipping point, where it's kind of a deciding level, which, people will be able to see this, and it either fails or it continues. If it continues, as you said, 40-year base. I mean, you have a 40-year base. Where do you think it's going to go?
I agree. That's. I keep looking at this chart and I'm like, I can't believe 40 years have gone by and nothing but a perfect chart has formed. Like, that's the mind-boggling part about this whole thing, David. People have been screaming, price manipulation forever, but all price manipulation is the movement of people. It's people reacting to the markets. And so they've done all this, but at the end of the day, all that's happened for 40 years is an incredible 40-year cup and handle formation. So I find that truly fascinating. I want to show you a couple things too. Check out page 31. And I think you'll find this rather fascinating, but you know Jonathan Kahn, right?
Oh, yes.
So Jonathan Kahn basically did he wrote a book called The Shemitah, right? So if you look on page 31, what it basically points to is that in 2015, we had the big crash of 2008. Every 7 years, there's basically a massive some type of a financial market event. And so it's interesting, but nothing happened in 2015 for the most part. And the reason being because it was actually 7 is the year of rest. Okay. And
Right.
so what that takes us the next 7 years takes into the next year, 2022. So we potentially have a huge market event coming next year based on a biblical Shemitah cycle. So I thought you might find that interesting in terms of, what we could see here as we head into next year. So that kind of plays into, if the stock market blows up, people are going to, lose. Finally, that's going to be the final biblical event that basically sets people into the precious metals. And the other chart I wanted you to see would be what we talked earlier about the Jubilee. And I think you'll find this rather interesting. But if you go to page 10, what a year of Jubilee is. So I went through the verses and I kind of did Leviticus 25. So just to kind of educate the viewers on what a year of Jubilee is. But basically, it's a year of rest. It's a holy year. It's when families and clans get back together. This is really important. It's a time for security. So in other words, peace. So security is returned. So peace and safety is supposed to be returned in the year of 50, so 50th year. And then we're supposed to provide enough in other words, it's a rebalancing. So it's a right of redemption. The right of redemption means finances shall be released to recover property for a full year. So in other words, it's a complete financial shift. The world itself has been based on the control of money. And so what I learned, which is through my wife, that the word mortgage is by definition death grip.
Yeah.
You realize that?
Yeah, I learned that a while back.
It's a death grip, right? So if you look at the page above it, page 9, what's been happening for all these years. So if you think back to, we all have seen the movie, well, not many people I'm sure have seen the movie Moses or the bondage thing where people, Israel's in bondage and in chains, right? So years ago, that was bondage, chains, right? Now the greatest form of bondage, they get smarter. Now these people that run the world have gotten smarter. They've realized that if you make people think they're free, but they're really not, right? That's the greatest form of bondage, right? So How do you enslave humanity? You basically create money out of thin air. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we talked about the trillions of dollars that have now created, overnight, right? All you do is you create the money, you give it to people, and what ends up happening is you give them, so now they have mortgages, death grips, and now they've got chains on. And so that's the essence of what a paper money system is. Mm-hmm. So when that whole system, should it one day break, David, that's what better time point for it to potentially happen, David, would be maybe in a year of 50, a year of Jubilee. So I find all of this truly fascinating. And I really like listening to your take on it because, from a silver perspective, you've been in this trench for years. Yeah. So page 12 basically talks about a kingdom economy. We, the people, are supposed to be lenders, not borrowers. Well, everybody across the world now are the borrowers and the banks are the lenders. That's what's been created because of all the fiat printing. Like we talked about earlier, silver and gold could never have value in a fiat money system because if silver or gold had like real value, if gold was 50,000 an ounce or 100,000 an ounce, then the paper would be worth nothing. Everybody would want to have gold. Just like everybody right now, David, would love to have a Bitcoin. Right? Wouldn't a lot of your viewers that are out there, wouldn't you love to have a Bitcoin right now if you never got into cryptocurrencies? Because guess what? They broke 50,000 today. Okay. And years ago, it was under $1. Like how insane is that? Okay. But that's because of fiat money printing. Now, because they have derivative contracts, they've been able to control precious metals, gold and silver. Okay. So my point being is that, and what's coming is the fall of the money system, the world reserve currency, the money system. If that system falls, because when it falls, what's happening is that's the birth of the king money system. Christ is king. He's bringing his kingdom. If you read Revelation, Christ is coming back. Okay, not tomorrow just yet, but he's coming. But his kingdom needs to be built on earth. His kingdom is going to be built on his money system. So that, in essence, is why Goliath must fall And then we must have the birth of this new money system, and that's going to lead to what you've talked about. Potentially, no one knows when, but potentially we could see these numbers of, you remember the reference, the price, $600 silver, $20,000, $30,000 gold. Who knows? But what's your take on all that, David?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense. I just got done, you may know, with the Silver Symposium, lots of mining companies, lots of commentators, analysis, the CPM group, Gold Silver Pros. I mean, I can't name them all. You can look at the website. And it was a really good 2-day event. And in my speech, I talked about why silver is not money. And so I did a very simple, again, arithmetic problem. In the 2019 census, there was 157 million workers in the United States. The average workday was 8.8 hours, and the average wage was $26 and change. So you can do that math in your head. 150 million 8-hour days is 1.2 billion man hours per day in the United States, and 26 is a perfect number for our discussion right now, Bo, because that's roughly an ounce of silver. So what that means is if you paid everybody's day labor for 1 day in the United States, it would wipe out more than the annual silver supply, which is 1 billion ounces. Remember, it takes 1.2 billion to do that and pay everybody in silver. And 850 million of that's mined, as we talked earlier, and 150 million ounces is roughly recycled silver. And so then the next slide I go in, so that's kind of the math, the arithmetic of why you'd wipe out the silver supply just paying for labor in silver. But why could you be on a silver standard for thousands of years? And then I brought it to more recent times for 400 years. Well, obviously, because the value would be in line with labor. So if you go back to ancient Rome, 1/10 of an ounce was a day's labor, not 8 ounces would be a day's labor. So 8 ounces divided by 1/10, you have like 80 days of labor if silver was valued at the same value, not dollar price, but value of ancient Rome. So every ounce of that silver would be worth, again, 10 days labor. So again, 80 days. So if you had that 80 factor, so what's 80 times 25? I don't know what's that would be, but that's the idea. I'm not trying to say that's the price silver should be. I'm telling you that's the value it used to be. That's an irrefutable fact. What my conjecture is it's highly undervalued. And of course, silver's highest and best use is money. And that's why the powers that be probably, had a good crystal ball. I'm trying to be funny here, and said, oh man, we got to get this stuff out of the money system as fast as possible because we need it for, what's coming up, right? And it's all the electronics and solar and green energy and catalysts and all the stuff that silver is used for. But silver's value has always been the highest when it's been money. And as you know, Bo, silver was the first money talked about in the Bible. Everything really revolved around the shekel, which is a measurement of silver. And, in a way, you could almost say that the whole silver system from a biblical perspective, this is my interesting point of view. People don't have a big panic attack. It's just a thought. I'm throwing it out at Bo because of his work and his knowledge. But, you go back and look at the 30 shekels that Judas took to betray Christ. I mean, that's got a pretty low value in terms of Labor Day, days of labor. And it's almost like mocking the value of silver from a perspective of, what would any life be worth? Of course, in my view, priceless. You can't put a price on it. But nonetheless, I mean, when silver is so low relative to where it has been historically on a monetary basis, it's almost, as Cliff High said, I think in a recent interview, not the one I did with him, but one I watched recently, they're almost paying you to take silver. It's that cheap.
While you're speaking, I love doing math. That's kind of my specialty. I'm doing I like crunching numbers. So you're giving a number just off the top of your head. You're saying, so what is was it 80 ounces or 80 times, what would you, 80 times 25, right?
Yeah.
That's $2,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so the actual price of silver potentially should be $2,000 coming out of the ground. I think the ratio, I think on average, maybe 15 to 1, maybe something in that range, right?
It's actually less than 10 to 1 now, Bo.
Yeah, so if it's 10 to 1, right, and you're able to buy silver, the ratio, gold to silver ratio is something like, isn't it 80 or 75 to 1? It's between 70 and 80 right now. So you're basically, like you said earlier, they're paying you to buy the silver right now because of that immense spread. So all I know is, after all my research, after all my studies, after meeting, people like you, David, who, for all these years have never stopped doing what you do, because you, in your heart, David, know you're right. You know the truth. Like, when you know the truth, you can't go back.
No.
Like you've learned the truth, the truth, everything you've learned over all these years, you can't now unlearn it. And so you can never stop doing what you're doing, because you know the truth, and that ultimately you're going to be proven right. But what I've come to realize after all these years of doing it is because the world is corrupt.
Yes.
And they use a money system which is corrupt, and they do this to control. That's the essence of what everything is.
It's about control.
Yeah. It's about control. Nothing more. If you don't want to see control, look what they're doing on the TV right now. Yeah. Like, talk about control for the past 12 months. Yeah. Like, it's insane, but that's what it's all about. And how do you control people? You scare them.
Keep them in fear.
Yep. Because evil, he kills, steals, destroys. He's nothing but he's a liar, and the people that work for him are nothing but magicians. And that's what it's all. It's all magic and magical numbers. It creating things out of thin air, and that is what's going on. But ultimately, the giant Goliath, his paper system, will fall. I want to read you a prophecy, which is actually, I think you'll find rather fascinating, and I believe this will come to fruition this decade. It's on page 12, but it says that there will be a moment in time when the currency system we know will totally fail.
Mm.
That's a prophetic word. My point being is that when that day happens, people will be asking themselves, why didn't we prepare? Why didn't we have silver? And that's what's coming to this world. We're going to have a moment in time, but there won't be tomorrow. Like you said, Goliath, it's going to have I think it's going to have a massive moment in time, which changes everything, and we go into another direction. But then that Goliath is going to keep falling into this latter part of the decade. It's going to keep crashing and getting worse and worse and worse. But then there will be that moment in time when this will happen. And when those times start to happen, guess what? Silver will become I think when this whole event starts to go down, silver is going to be the word unobtainium, right? Yep. So at some point, David, when this thing starts to go down, and if you can obtain it, David, talk to me about spreads. Like, if silver jumped up to $100 next week, what would the spread be to get it in your hand? What's your thought?
Well, obviously the market knows more than me, and one of my favorite phrases, but my guess would be, if it made that big a move, the spread would be, maybe percentage-wise about the same. So what's the spread now? You're looking at 25, and I think, for bars, you're only paying at wholesale level maybe 2.5. So 20, you're paying maybe 10. And then on coins, you're paying maybe 30%. So 30% on 100 would be $30. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it sell for $130 to $150, even a 50% spread to get it, because you're going to have to pull it out. And so that means, again, as we talked at the beginning of this conversation, that the reason the premiums are so high is because someone's bidding to get it. I mean, someone doesn't want a 1,000-ounce bar, but they want silver. So they're willing to pay more than the derivative price to get the real metal. And I got to digress a bit, because you triggered a thought on the Middle East again. And this is a bit embarrassing on my part, but I had a pretty wealthy fund manager call me years ago, And he was telling me about, and I'm going to give me names, and that's fine. And you can believe the story or not. Just think of it as a story. Think of it as a metaphor. You don't have to think of it as actually happening. And asked me, this this entity in the Middle East was very concerned about what was going on and wanted to move some money. And, what would I suggest? And of course, what did I say? I said, you should buy some silver, I said, okay, well, that would take up this much. We bought up the entire world silver supply. Now we've got 90% left. We've used 10% of their, this amount, bought up the entire world silver supply. Now what do you suggest? And I had to laugh at myself because it was true.
Yeah.
Because the amount of fiat that they were talking about, only 10% of that amount would buy up the entire global silver supply, with 9 times that amount left to invest somewhere.
Yeah.
So that kind of shows you how small the silver market really is. And there's reasons why people don't get into, that level of people don't get into it. There's many reasons. And I'll give one more real quick anecdotal story. I was in London at a conference, and they're much different than the conferences that you and I go to in North America. They're very small, relatively speaking, and they're all these fund managers that manage, millions, if not, billion or two. And this one guy came by with his whatever watch, which I'm not a watch guy. I don't know, the watch is worth 30 grand or something. And he's kind of talking down to me, which is fine. It's happened. It'll happen again. He said, well, our fund couldn't buy silver because we got too much money. We couldn't buy it. And I just, shrugged him off, chit-chatted, and he moved on to somebody else. And then I thought, darn, because you always remember your retorts after, or aside, I'm a deep thinker. I'm not real quick, when things hit me fast, you don't have like the perfect quip back. But I did think about it. I thought, well, it wasn't too big for Warren Buffett to buy. But anyway, I digress. I'll throw it back at you. Maybe we can go ahead and wrap it up. It's been fascinating. Thank you for asking me to come on. We don't get this perspective on silver very often. One more I have to tell you. I think I told you offline one time, but I was at a conference, the World Outlook Conference, and it was pretty early in my speaking career on the metals. And it just hit me. We'll call it some help from above. But I was at the end and I talked about, well, silver, conducts heat better than any other element known to man, and silver reflects light better than any element known to man. So those that don't see the light are going to feel the heat.
Oh, I love it. That's the best. That's great. And I actually want to, and closing too, I want to kind of wrap back to what you just said. If you buy silver today under 30 or at 30, based on the spread, at $100, that will just be the spread.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
When silver gets to $100, like David just said, you'll be paying the 30 you would pay today just for the spread. You haven't even
could
bought
be.
them.
We don't know for sure, but yeah,
no one knows for sure. But I don't think you're far off, David. I think you're low, because when silver does take off, how many dealers are going to want to sell? Because they may not be able to replenish their inventory. That's what I've heard. So dealers may not want to sell because they don't know if they can buy it back. And if they're going to buy it back, what are they going to buy it for? So that's really the big if, there's just so many ifs. So all I can say is great. David, where can they find you, and anything you want to talk about that you offer on your website?
Sure. The best way to find us is, as always, at the main website, themorganreport.com. So if you get on the morganreport.com landing page, go ahead and just give us a name and an email and join our free newsletter. If you want to take a moment, I suggest you go to the About page. If you go to the About page, on the right-hand column, there is Claim Your Special Report, 5 most viewed videos. If you click those 5 most viewed videos, all of them are pretty short in duration. I would suggest everyone, they're free, just take a few minutes to watch at least one a day, or watch all 5 in a day. It talks about the currency crisis, and that's from the movie Rollover, that silver's the Achilles heel of the entire system. I really like that one. Great silver market myth. And then Escape the Matrix. You can skip that one if you want. And that's it. So you watch those 3 or 4. And then on that same page, the about page, if you scroll down, the movie Four Horsemen, it's is a documentary. It's an hour and a half for free. And it talks about what happens at the end of the Age of Empire. And this is a repeat cycle. As you know, as a cycles guy, we've seen it again and again and again. You've got the Byzantine, the Mesopotamian, the Mayan, the Roman, the Greco-Roman. I mean, you've got all these empires that have risen and fallen, all the dynasties in China. This is not a phenomena of we're the only ones. What's unique from what I understand and the blurred history that we get, I don't believe all the textbooks out there, is it's global. This is an interconnected system between, the producers, which is mainly China, and the rest of the world. I mean, most of your goods, finished goods, come from China. A lot of your food still is out of the U.S., but there's food problems. It's biblical. I mean, let's just get right to it. It's a biblical situation where we are entering a time of troubles, and you can frame that any way you want. I'll give it back to you. Thanks. Go to themorganreport.com, explore the website. There's the blog, which gives all the stuff I do for free, which is substantial. And then podcast, there's the books are still available. 2 of them are. I don't consult anymore. I don't have time. If you want to subscribe to the newsletter, hit the subscribe tab. And I've talked long enough. Back to you, Bo.
I'll tell you, you talked about the Four Horsemen. So the financial event that we talked about today, I believe, is the 3rd. That is Revelation 6:5. So everybody, God bless you, David, your family. Thank you for being here, everybody. David Morgan, the Silver Guru.